We're really excited today to have Scott Doyle, Billy Giblin, and Mitch Richardson. They're going to tell us all about 45L tax credit incentives and working with your trades, and lots of good information. It looks like they've got a lot to get through, so we're not going to dawdle here. I'll just introduce Scott Doyle is the quality assurance managing director for RESNET. Billy Giblin is a I want to make sure I get this right, quality assurance field specialist with RESNET. And Mitch is the owner of Building Science West out in Utah, which is a rating firm. So I'm going to turn it over to Billy, who's going to kick things off. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat section. We'll hold those till the end so they can get through their presentation. But with that, Billy, turn it over to you.
Hey everyone, how are you? Y'all are enjoying your summer wherever you are. Thanks, Mitch. So this presentation is called Cost-Effective Building Strategies and Guiding Your Trades Priorities to Earn the 45L and 179D tax credits and to be eligible for HUD 221D4 loans. Next slide. Learn objectives. The slides aren't necessarily sequenced this way. There's some overlap and they're somewhat out of sequence at times, but at the end, hopefully, the objective is that you'll learn something about 45L tax credits for builders of single family and multifamily. We had a little more of a focus on multifamily than we did last year, and the 179D tax credits and HUD loans for builders of multifamily homes. Identify what your trades may have to do differently to help your homes earn Energy Star and Zero Energy Ready Home certifications. Learn which trades are responsible for which items and when to address each of those items. Understand the most cost-effective strategies to earn Energy Star and Zero Energy Ready Home certification. Learn how HERS Raters can be your resource to earn the 45L and 179D tax credits and be eligible for the HUD loans. So with that, next slide. So there are 4 piles of money. So I'm on the first slide there. 45L, 25,000 or 5,000, 2,500 or $5,000 per unit or per home or per unit for multifamily. For Energy Stars, 2,500. For Zero Energy Ready Homes, it's 5,000 per unit. The 179D tax deduction is one time per building. It would be, we'll get more specific with it, but it would calculate to be somewhere in the area of $2.50 to like $5.35 or something per square foot. And there's $500 to $900 per unit per year through the HUD loan. And the HUD, Mitch, help me out. Well, we'll talk more specifics.
Yeah, we'll get into details.
Okay, and then utility rebates, which hopefully are available for in the areas where you're building homes, and it depends on where you are and what's available. The 45L tax credit, again, $2,500 for Energy Star, $5,000 for ZERH or Zero Energy Ready Homes, or ZERH, I'll call it for, and $2,500 tax credit for a home that is certified to meet the EPA's Energy Star Single Family New Homes Program or multifamily Energy Star multifamily new construction program. $5,000 tax credit for homes certified to meet the DOE's Zero Energy Ready Home Program. You want to keep these certificates, and then there's an IRS form 8908 that you fill out to claim tax credits. Claim those tax credits. Generally working with an energy rater, the energy raters know these processes pretty well. It's part of how they, make themselves more valuable to their clients, and so they understand the process and hopefully understand even they're going to put you to your tax specialist, obviously, ultimately to help you get through the real portion of getting tax credits, but they understand a lot of what needs to be done to get you there. So generally working with the energy rater from the design phase through finish is is key to success, so that you don't miss a step that may preclude you from any of these credits or incentives. Often with preliminary or projected models that you do pre-construction, you can understand what you need to do to meet specifications in lots of details about HVAC and the thermal envelope, et cetera. You can be clear on if you want to make decisions to go one way with certain components of the house, then you may find you have to go a different way with others to meet it overall. Next slide. This just shows kind of a visual that these all build on each other. You know, code home is kind of your basic. You got to do that to get a C of O and sell the home, and that varies all over the country, and even in some states, you know, home rule states like Colorado where we live, you know, from town to town. On top of that, HERS rating is really, you know, something done by a third party, and it's more than just meeting code, but you know, there'll be performance energy modeling, and it's more performance of the entire home and takes into consideration all the components. And you get a HERS index, which is a score that can go into all these other certifications potentially. The Energy Star certification is more specific, again, EPA program, and the HERS rating is often part of that. The DOE Zero Energy Ready Home certification meets Energy Star and goes beyond that to with a few more specifics about how the home is built, as well as making the home zero energy ready by putting in things in place at construction phase that will allow you to add solar, you know, renewables later easily. And just another example is passive house, which takes it a little bit higher with you have to be Energy Star, you have to be zero energy ready homes, but they also have other things in place, like I think Indoor Air Plus and a much more enhanced envelope, and the house has to be super tight with, you know, specific mechanical insulation, and mechanical ventilation, sorry. Going from one to the other, it's a bigger general, you know, depending on where you live, of course. The code minimum to Energy Star can be a bigger jump, 20%, let's say, on average around the country. It could be more, could be less, but there can be lots of details to manage. There's checklists, there's a couple things you gotta do, and you can't miss. You gotta have a rough inspection, you know, a pre-drywall, post insulation, or a post insulation pre-drywall inspection that is required. If you don't do that, you won't be eligible. So it's a big step to kind of to go from code sometimes to Energy Star. That's that once you're in Energy Star and you're kind of in the groove with that, jumping from Energy Star to zero energy ready homes is a smaller step and more cost effective. So that extra $2,500 tax incentive is a little more doable once you get there, because you've kind of got your bigger learning curve has already happened. So you really need to build and be passing Energy Star certifications consistently and reliably, and then that's kind of time to step ahead to zero energy ready next. So just looking at Energy Star multifamily new construction, there's a version presently, we're in 1.1, and we are, you know, in the process of starting to transition towards version 1.2. Version 1.1 is more straightforward, you know, of the two, where version 1.2 is going to add a lot more rigor and more specification levels. Generally for multifamily, if you're not doing multifamily, you may not know this. If you are, you probably do, but the design process itself can go, you know, on average 1.5 to 2 years. So just something to be thinking about is that everything acquisition date, you know, the closing of a project in 2027. By the time in 2027, everything will have moved to version 1.2. So things you start designing next year in 2025, really, you kind of have to start analyzing and planning to build to that more rigorous version 1.2. Next slide. Mitch, go ahead.
Okay. So one of the requirements for the 45L for multifamily is that you have to do wage tracking requirements for prevailing wage. If you've ever worked a Davis-Bacon job, it's similar to that, but it's important to recognize that it is not the same. It uses the same Department of Labor tables and codes, but the requirements are different in many ways. So if on a multifamily job to get the 45L, if you were only Energy Star and you did not track wages, you can only safely collect $500 per unit tax credit. But if you did the wage tracking, then you can safely collect the full $2,500 per unit for being Energy Star. And then if you did the ZERH, you can get the full $5,000. And then again, on the ZERH, if you did not do the wage tracking, you can only safely claim significantly less than that. On the single family home side, you are not required to track wages at all, so, which is nice for the single family. I've got a sample wage tracking solution here listed. It's EMARS. They have some stuff specific for 45L and 179D. Important to know, it's not the only wage tracker out there. It's just this is one that I vetted and has some good stuff specifically for the 45L and 179D. Worth noting on this first bullet point, if your project is like a HUD job or is required for some other reason to be Davis-Bacon, then that project is going to be pretty much ready to go. You won't have to do any additional wage tracking. What you're doing for Davis-Bacon will work, but you need to discuss your needs, your reporting needs beforehand with the tracking provider to make sure that you can get the right amount of reports with the right details on it. And then with these reports, that is all you will need. And it's again, it's useful to compare it to Davis-Bacon, but always important to say that it is not Davis-Bacon. For example, you don't have to pay every week. You can pay every other week. You don't have to collect the reports every payroll period. You could do it every month or every quarter if you want it. The most important part is that you have all the minimum data at the end. Here's some example of some wage determinations here for Utah, what the Department of Labor classifications are, what the rates and fringes are, just as an example for you to look at. Here's an example, slightly pixelated example of the minimum required data that you would be required to collect and report to the, keep on file in case the IRS ever decides to do a document request or an audit. Also important to note that, participating in these programs doesn't make you any more likely to get audited or anything like that. Frequently, though, the IRS will make a document request, which is not an audit, but it freaks people out. So I just wanted to say that a document request is not a big deal. You just need to turn in this documentation. Here's another example. This is an example of what EMARS outputs as for the minimum requirements for those wage reports that you have to keep on file. So again, there are competitors to EMARS. This isn't the only option. Also, if your trades already have the correct, if they already have a relationship with a wage tracker, or their current software can spit out this minimum amount of reports, that is fine and dandy. You don't have to use EMARS or any particular thing. The most important thing is that you collect the data. For the 45L, we'll discuss this. The 45L is different from the 179D in one aspect, and that is apprenticeship requirements. The 45L does not require you to track apprenticeship stuff. The 179D does, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. The fees for something like this can be $80 per month per contractor if you're just doing it, here and there for different contractors, or if they're going to do it for all of your contractors, you know, they have a little bit more cost-effective way of pricing it that's based off of the value of your project. So collect the reports. I suggest you do it at least quarterly. Monthly is an even better idea. I don't recommend doing it by pay period necessarily, as that's a lot of extra paperwork. Some pro tips if you put in your contracts with the trades and the subs some sort of language that they're required to pay prevailing wage, that helps in case you ever get audited. Another pro tip is that if you post the prevailing wage tables at your job site, you know, next to the safety stuff that you post, and take a picture of that and keep that on file, that also helps in case of a audit. But again, neither one is necessary. And again, paying biweekly is just fine. Okay, so that was the 45L. 45L is a tax credit that it gets you, $2,500 to $500, $2,500 or $5,000. The 179D is a deduction, and this is for multifamily only. The deduction amount that you would be eligible for would be between $2.50 a square foot up to $5.36 a square foot. Actually, it might be a little bit higher right now, as far as $5.65, as it's as this deduction amount has a inflation adjustment slider to it. But for purposes of this discussion, it's $2.50 to $5 a square foot. It requires separate building energy modeling, whole building energy modeling. So like Ecotrope and REMRate won't do it. You'd have to use eQuest, Energy Plus, or similar. The 179D is best when it's combined with a cost segregation study from a CPA. It'll really kind of turbo your savings. But again, you need a CPA to do this sort of thing. There's many firms that actually specify in cost segregation study and can help you out with 179D details as well. Also worth noting, you can do a 45L and a 179D on the same building. That's totally kosher and okay. Noteworthy that it's only for buildings where 4 stories or higher. 3 stories and lower are not eligible for the 179D. Also, buildings that are, kind of small buildings that are smaller than like 30,000 square feet, there might not be enough deduction in there to make it worth all the work that you have to do, all the modeling, the whole building modeling, that kind of stuff. Most energy raters won't have a lot of experience with this and might need to partner with an engineering firm to do the whole building modeling. So that's noteworthy for builders as well. And raters, just a tip for you guys. That's a good way to keep, to make your services more valuable to your multifamily builders. And if you drive the partnership, that means that you get, you keep those customers more captive and they don't, send out for more bids, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, Mitch, if you don't mind, I was just going to add, there are, some of the scaled up rating operations that either were bought by engineering firms or they bought an engineering firm. So I think Mitch is right. The majority of raters will not have this in-house, but that's not exclusively true. There are definitely some, and it's worth asking. I'll hit that when I get to my slides about, how to find an energy rater.
Yes, important. Thank you, Scott, for that. It's very true. Like my firm, we can do it in-house as well. But yeah, you just have to ask. And if you don't have an in-house firm, that's okay. You can partner up with someone else. So for an Energy Star performance level, usually that'll get you at least into the program where you're let's see if I discuss this. So to get into the program for the 179D, you have to be 25% above the ASHRAE 90.1 2007 baseline requirements. So if you're building to Energy Star multifamily 1.1, usually that will get you above that baseline at 25% above that baseline. And that 25% baseline, you get the $2.50 a square foot. If you get 50% above that baseline, you get $5 a square foot. Again, that is if you are also doing the labor tracking. If you don't do the labor tracking, you can only, your deduction is worth 1/5 of that. So instead of, if you got up to 50% and you got the $5 a square foot, if you did not do the labor tracking, then you only get $1 per square foot for the deduction amount. Important to note, again, this is a deduction, not a tax credit like the 45L. So like if you got to the $5 level, that's, you know, it's worth 33 cents on the dollar, depending on, you know, the tax bracket of the entity filing. One upgrade over the 45L wage tracking requirements is apprenticeship tracking requirements. There's a journeyman to apprentice ratio. 15% of the hours must be apprentice hours. If you have more than 4 workers on site for a particular trade, one must be an apprentice. This can seem and feel like a bit of a big ask a lot of the times, but there is a way out if you can't get apprentice workers, and that is to document the unavailability of approved apprentices. And how you do that is you'd send a certified letter to a trade school or a union shop. And then if they don't reply, they would either reply and say, we don't have anybody available. Or if they don't reply in 5 days, then you have 120 days that you don't have to send the letter or ask again. So there are ways to manage that so that it's not so burdensome. Here's an example from that EMARS company of some apprentice journeyman ratios. So that was 45L and 179D, and now we're going to move into the HUD 223F and the HUD 221D4. So these are some pretty aggressive incentives from HUD that are great for multifamily buildings. We've had, you know, over the years, people coming to, you know, at least our firm wanting to be Energy Star just to get into this program, even before, you know, the deductions and tax credits I just discussed. So it's worth it for most builders to do this program without any other incentive. It works for market rate or affordable product. The biggest benefit is that you pay 58% less mortgage insurance on the building. And I've been told that that's, you know, like cash equivalent value. It means that each unit in that building will save you $500 to $900 a year. You pay the MIP, the mortgage insurance protection, on 25 basis points instead of 60. Also, it's non-recourse debt, which means that it doesn't, you know, on the next project you do, if this one isn't closed out yet, you know, it doesn't lessen your leverage. Also, you get a 40-year amortization instead of a 30. So it's, again, it's a very aggressive incentive that you should be letting your multifamily builders know about. In order to get into these HUD loans, you must be, it's a two-parter, which I'll discuss in a second. Part one is that you have to use the Energy Star Portfolio Manager to generate what's called a SETI score, or a Statement of Energy Design Intent. And the official writings is that you only have to be in the top 25th percentile, or you have to score 75 or better. But the reality is that to get into the program, you really need to be at least above 80 to get into the program, because there's an ongoing requirement of these HUD loans that you have to turn in your energy use every year. And to stay in the program, you have to be above a 75, which isn't a big deal, you know, once you get into the program. So that's part one, is the Energy Star Portfolio Manager, or SETI score. Part two is that you have to build your product and certify it to a green energy standard. And it's a builder's choice on which standard you use. You can use Energy Star Multifamily, you can use LEED, you can use NGBS, and there's a couple of others that are, you know, more popular in some regions than others. But most choose Energy Star these days for the 45L tax incentives. So worth noting there. And again, difference between those two loans, the 221D4 is a construction loan and a long-term loan rolled into one. On the 223F, is more of a refinance product where you'd get a traditional construction loan, and then when you go to your permanent financing, you use the 223F to get this incentive from HUD. Frequently for HUD, it's already required to do certified payroll or like Davis-Bacon style. So that sets you up well for the 45L and the 179D incentives. So we've got our 45L money, we've got our 179D money, we've got our HUD money, and then that fourth pile of money is the utility rebates. This website right here, DSIREusa.org, tracks most of the bigger utility rebates that are available here in Utah. Typical rebate for multifamily is $400 from the power company up to $800 from the gas company. For single family, $400 from power, $1,000 from gas, is a fairly typical amount to get. So for your regions, this DesireUSA.org is a good place to start to find out about rebates and or go to your local utilities to see what they have. Now we're going to transfer into some gap analysis discussion. And I think either Billy or Scott was going to take it from here.
Yeah, I've got that. Thanks, Mitch. So one of the things you should be asking way at the beginning, if you're considering any of these incentives like the LEAP, if you're doing Energy Star currently and you're just worried about what will happen when I have to do Energy Star 3.2, or you're doing that and you're thinking about, how close am I to zero energy ready? Is it worth that, extra $2,500? One of the things that you should have your energy rater do for you is a gap analysis. So that's really analyzing what you're building today and looking at what sort of gap you're going to have to fill. It's not one set of specifications. Because most of the programs we're talking about, federal programs for Energy Star and Zero Energy Ready, they do have some mandatory requirements. So the rater's going to say, okay, well, let's start there. Let's, say we're going to build in the mandatory requirements if you're not meeting them now. But there's a lot of other stuff where there is a range of options and you've got the ability to make some choices. So you might do a better HVAC system and a little bit less on your envelope or vice versa. Where in areas where you have some flexibility. But the most important thing is to start with this gap analysis that says, okay, what are you building to today, maybe for a given plan or model, and maybe in the case of a project like a multifamily project that hasn't been built yet, at least start with the base code. It's not necessarily safe to say, oh, well, there's a gap I found online somewhere that says, here's the 21 code and here's what it would be to jump to Energy Star, because so many states, they might say they adopted the 21 code or the 2018 code or whatever, but they make a lot of amendments to it. So you're going to want to make sure that the energy rater is looking at the code as it's being adopted and enforced with amendments in the municipality where you're going to build, and then use that for the basis for the gap analysis. Next slide, Billy. So let's see. This is an example of something that your rater might model for you if you're asking for some comparisons. The tables here, they're kind of small, but we're looking at a bunch of different energy specifications that might go into a given dwelling. And in this case, the name of the plan is just a Tahoe plan, built-in climate zone 5. And each of the columns represents, building that same plan to a different target. So this first column here is code minimum. So that's pretty easy to drop in, just the rater knowing what the local code requirements are and building those specifications in, and then moving on from there. So to jump to Energy Star 3.1, we've got some cells highlighted here. That's where you weren't able to just stay with the code minimum. You had to upgrade your wall R values. You had to upgrade your ceiling, or excuse me, your window U values and solar heat gains to meet the Energy Star minimums, for example. And moving from left to right on this chart is getting a little bit more aggressive to Energy Star 3.2, zero energy ready homes. You'll notice in that column, one of the things you had to do with your ducts is to move them all inside. So that's a mandatory requirement of zero energy ready homes, not to allow the air distribution system to be outside conditioned volume. Let's go to the next slide. Just continuing with that gap analysis, some additional examples here. You know, if you have an option, for example, let's say this Tahoe plan could be built with an optional basement or something, those are also worth considering because you might come up with a minimum set of specifications that you think work for your base plan, but then certain options for that same plan that changes the geometry or changes, you know, the HVAC sizing might change some of the ways that the model reflects that. And you want to make sure that you're covering all the potential scenarios that you might use for this plan. Next slide. So I wanted to give a couple of tips here. This is kind of my top 5 list of things you should be considering. It's titled for multifamily project. A lot of these would transfer to those of you that are building single family homes. Just to give you, you know, an idea of some things that I would like you to ask for, look for when you're considering hiring an energy rater for your next project. And the first one, and this is particularly true for multifamily, is ask them for a portfolio. Make sure that they have experience in the climate zone that you're building in, experience with this municipality, be even better. So they understand how the code's being enforced there. Sometimes that gets really into the weeds, like in a multifamily project. It could be, you know, where is this municipality holding the line on what they interpret the fire code to mean, and how does that affect the way that you're constructing the common walls? You know, and is there any places where the air sealing requirements of Energy Star will conflict with that? So having the rater be experienced with that municipality is helpful. Also having them experienced in the housing types. So if they haven't worked on multifamily at all, or they've worked on maybe townhomes, but you're building a mid-rise or a high-rise, that's important to understand that in their portfolio, they've got the expertise that you're going to need for your particular project. And it's a big leap to go from just doing, like, you know, blower door testing and duct testing for single family homes to now, you know, this is the person you're going to lean on if you've got like a big building and you're, you know, stacked dwelling units and you're trying to meet zero energy ready homes, for example. Next slide. This is an important one. You really need to understand their capacity. You know, and everybody wants to say, oh yeah, I can take this on, I can handle this. And then in the back of their head, like, I'm going to have to hire a bunch of people if I land this project. You want them to be upfront with you. You need to be specific about what you're asking. Your pace of construction matters. You might overwhelm a small firm with volume. And you just want to make sure that the rating company you select is going to have adequate staffing to meet your needs. Next one. Training and consulting services are something I always offered when I was a rater. I believe that this is an important service to offer. It might not be a line item in their bid or something, but it is something you might be expecting that they're offering. You should have that conversation and make sure they're on board with this, because particularly if your trades have not participated in one of these federal programs, there's going to be a learning curve for them. You know, your framers, your insulators, your HVAC contractor especially is going to be facing a learning curve, and you want the energy rater company that you hire to be, you know, capable and willing to do some training and consulting in the field. Next slide. This is kind of the last one. This mostly applies to multifamily projects, and as Mitch was talking about specifically, some of the rebates that and money that you can access, like the HUD money. If you're building a large building, you might actually need to do whole building modeling. So you might have been working in a different size building, like a 3-story townhome project or something, or even a 3-story stack project that was able to follow the HERS index path, or the ERI path, I should say, for Zero Energy Ready or Energy Star. But if you start getting into some of these large buildings, you might end up having to use a different path depending on which incentive program you're going for. And for that, you may need whole building modeling. So as we mentioned, some energy rating firms have this in-house, the capacity to do whole building modeling. Some may have partnerships. If they don't have an answer to this question, and this is a need for your project, then you probably need to consider, hiring a different energy rating firm. Next slide. And this is kind of my last one. This is something you probably all have learned this same thing the hard way as I have. Beware of the way too low bidder. It's one thing if they're all kind of bunched together and you've got, one that's just a little bit lower than the rest. But I've lost projects before to somebody who was way outside the cluster. We found out some inside information that the other bids were over here, and then there was one anomalous bid that was way low. That could be an indicator that they actually don't know what they're getting into. And you're going to probably end up spending more money in the long run if you hire that firm. So that's kind of my last tip, is beware of that. The next slide, I've got just kind of some other general ones, some bonus questions that you could ask. If you've got particularly complex projects, or you've got a parking garage, ask them for some specific things. How should I insulate between this garage and living space to meet, the Zero Energy Ready program, for example? Where is the sound control that I'm going to do complementary to the air sealing, or is it redundant? Are there places where I can spend that money on sound control and get the air sealing essentially along with it? Next slide. So for the HERS Rater out there may be a few HERS Raters listening. You want to make sure that you get certified to do multifamily. Take the required classes. Energy Star has specific training. RESNET has specific training for multifamily. You really should be good at single family before you jump right into this. This is sort of personal opinion. Maybe depending on your background, you're ready to jump into multifamily. But for most raters, the background that they're coming into it with, it's better to get good at single family before you make this jump. It'd be good to partner with an experienced firm. In some cases, you can be the field data collector for a firm that has the contract with this, developer, and that's a good way to get your foot in the door. Billy, next. I'm sorry, I got a couple more. There's a couple of pitfalls. Yeah, go back to that pitfall slide, Mitch. There's a couple of pitfalls to warn you about, and this one I've experienced personally. Specs changing in the middle of the project. It's a nightmare for the rater, and it will be a nightmare for the builder as well, because all that work that we were talking about on the front end, all that pre-modeling where we can say, okay, if you use this set of specs, we can get you to Energy Star 3.2, for example. Then all of a sudden, you're going out there for your inspections and you realize this is not the air conditioning condenser that we discussed you were going to use, and you've done it on 100 units now. They've been installed. And when I go back and model this different one that you changed it to, it changes the compliance, and you're no longer as efficient as we thought you were going to be. And now you either take those back out, or you've got some other specification change to make in order to be there. So there's a few pitfalls like that. Kitchen mechanical ventilation is another one I would highlight from this list. And where I've seen that kind of go south is, it's in the prints, it's in the specs. Everybody expected it to get ducted to the outside, and then it just didn't get executed in the field, and you have recircs. Well, what that ends up meaning is you may build out your project by the time somebody opens a cupboard door and realizes that's not ducted to the outside. You've got a lot of units already built, some of them occupied, and now all of a sudden these aren't going to meet the Energy Star requirements because it's required to be ducted to the outside. So don't fall into that pitfall. And then finally, sometimes the office staff doesn't empower the supers. Sometimes the scope or whatever, is just wrong to start with. You might change supers partway through the project and the new one doesn't understand the Energy Star details. These programs are no joke. And, because of all the money we're talking about, the consequences for finding out at the end that you're failing now have real money consequences. It's not just a matter of I lost the prestige of this label. You could potentially miss out on the money. And then hopefully don't value engineer some of these things away. There's a few important things: air sealing, insulation, windows, HVAC. Those are kind of the heavy hitter things, water heating. as far as your energy use goes. And I know that partway through some of these projects, you're over costs and you're looking for ways to cut that back. But you should not do that without consulting the energy rater, because some of those things that you could cut might land you in that same predicament I was talking about with the AC condensers. Next slide. So this is just kind of an example, don't change these things without some consultation. The rater has done this work for you to make sure that based on a set of specs that you've told them you're going to use, they know what the performance would be. If you don't do those specs, now all bets are off. Let's just skip that one, Billy, and we'll let you guys read through some of the other examples for coordination. Or Mitch, next slide.
Okay. I actually, do you mind? Thanks for going there. So yeah, just some other coordination with the trades. This is kind of with the rater and the builder to things to be aware of and things to, for sake of coordinating your trades and working together and helping the other trades understand each other's work is we'll talk first on just advanced framing, how, focusing on your framers, and then air sealing, who does which air sealing when, and then other trades coming in later, and then in the process of doing their work, potentially undoing an earlier trade, HVAC trade work, or just one trade not knowing that they're interfering or somehow compromising the last trade's work. And then just other details like that we'll get into here specifically. I'm gonna have to move kind of fast, so I'm gonna have to just go through these photos quick. Optimize framing, just list some things about different things that hopefully you're already doing or you may have been doing for a long time. Some folks are just moving to this, or it's becoming more required. Just, California corners, double top plates, right size headers, etc. Next slide is good. Insulation grading. This is something that your rater will do for you, and it needs to do for you. It goes into your model, and for sake of Energy Star, a grade 3 just will not fly for an Energy Star home. Therefore, zero energy ready, and with proper insulation. Improper insulation levels could, a bad install could cost you the incentive. Air sealing is required in general. With a HERS rating, it's really just measured by the blower door. At the end is all that really dictates, or is the only thing that goes in the model that reflects the air sealing, but a lot of code requires it anyways, and then definitely some of these Energy Star, Zero Energy, these energy efficient programs require it, and there's a lot of little specifics and details that need to be understood and not overlooked, and not undone by other trades coming in. Just some pictures of it there. We'll send out PDFs of this. So these pictures you might want to take a little time and look at some of these photos and get a little more specific. You can see it a little more clearly and take your time looking at it. But there's pre-drywall stages of construction design, and then obviously foundation slab. You might do some duct testing mid-construction before installation, framing itself, and some of the exterior air barrier. These are stages of construction where different types of air sealing do happen. And the actual insulation and air sealing, the brunt of it there, and then at the very end, after drywall, there's air sealing that happens before attic insulation. Go ahead. Design stage, you can really look at, should be able to see, and that's the better time to look at. Do I have a continuous thermal barrier? Do I have a continuous air sealing around the thermal barrier? And just drawing these lines that they're doing here to really check and make sure, am I really hitting every, am I missing, is there a spot where I just, because of a detail, all of a sudden there's no air sealing in a place where air can move through. So you can either focus on either the drywall plane, the inside plane, or the exterior OSB sheathing layer, but if you try to mix those, that's where you might end up with a gap that you overlooked. And then you'll find later that you have a lot of air leaking there. And also you just could have, depending on the complexity of your building, you just could have many different types of walls, with interfacing between the conditioned space and different types of other spaces, be it a garage or straight to the outside or to an unconditioned attic or to a semi-conditioned attic or to a crawl or into a different conditioned space or adiabatic into another unit if you're sharing a wall. So just being conscious of every plane of the house and what does it plane of the room and plane of the house and what's on the other side from the conditioned space. Mechanical plumbing chases are and fireplace chases, things like that. They are places often that just run up and they're framed out nice and all that, but they don't properly seal the top. They seal the 5 sides. There's a floor usually, and there's 4 sides, but then everything's free to move straight up into the attic. And depending on what's going on in your attic, that could mean straight to the outside. So those chases are details to pay attention to. Something might be inside the house and look tightened up from around, but it opens up, to the top. In this case, it could be an interior wall. Go ahead and click it again. I think it's about the or an exterior wall, or you have these chases that could be, that can be, it can both be problematic in the same way or different ways. Go ahead. Click again. So again, yeah, just another little detailed chase there of a little funky angle that was put in and created a chase going up. Go ahead. So the big thing is to put that 6th side. You just can't stuff permeable, air permeable insulation in there as an air barrier, because it's just an air filter really, and the air will just move through that insulation there on the left photo, where in the right photo they put in a solid piece that looks like drywall, and you've got a solid air barrier on the top as well of that chase. Go ahead. And that was because you kind of found it. Oh, that's going to, you found it in the design stage and made sure it got dealt with in construction. So this is just a quick view, for both, multifamily there on the left and multifamily and single family, just how, a foundation type can be a bigger detail, more complicated detail, depending on the type of construction. You could have multiple types of foundation. You can have a mixed, like the house on the far right there, and that's on a slope. You got walkout basement on the bottom floor and then a walkout, living room on the top floor on the uphill side, but you've got everything in between where you got fully underground foundation to I think there's even a crawl in that house. You've got all different types of foundation types that the rater and yourself that you need to both understand the details of how those are sealed and how those are constructed and how those are modeled. Go ahead. Just a detail to make sure, for your super, to make sure that as the trades are coming through, that just keeping a clean construction site, is important for many reasons. And in the case of things done directly onto concrete, and depending on time of year, that left photo looks like there's snow on the left there, snow and moisture, like cleaning off having as clean of a surface as possible before you put the next layer of construction on top of it makes a big difference. You end up with these gaps on the right. You can just see little tiny air. You can see light coming underneath that bottom plate, sill plate. And then addressing these little cracks and voids, because they may look like a little thing, but later on it becomes clear that they're a point of leakage. So the air sealing these areas, it can be a more complicated detail than it seems. It seems like it took care of it, but something bulges out with an expansion joint or something like that, it becomes a problem later on if not dealt with. Go ahead. Sealing ductwork, just this nice little tip here, brushing against the seam, so don't necessarily go with the seam, to kind of make a nice little, thin line of mastic along the seam, but really actually brushing perpendicular into it is actually pushing the mastic into that little crack where that sheet metal is bent over at the junction, at the joint, at the junction. You're forcing the mastic into those cracks, and that's really what's sealing that joint. So that's actually that's a much better kind of visual of it there, where the putty knife is just pushing that goop right into the crack. Next slide. Oh yeah, and actually go back real fast. Where the person, you know, kind of going on the right there, it says waste. You know, they're doing all this amazing, you know, they're laying on this thick layer, but they used a bunch of mastic and maybe even cost more time, but may or may not have even, you know, done the job. Go ahead. Cold duct leakage testing at pre-drywall, sometimes even pre-installation. The value that can be that if it's leaky, you can get in and fix it because it's completely exposed. So just whether for a lot of builders and raters, that's a given. And for a lot of folks, it doesn't happen until the end, but the value of maybe even paying for that extra test or that extra visit, even pre-installation might be worth it because you can get to everything. At the framing stage, air sealing, it's more easy at the framing stage. You know, once you start putting in insulation, you may have kind of just made it more challenging to see or get to places that need to be air sealed. So a fair amount of air sealing, most of the air sealing in the house really needs to have happened before you get to insulation. Go ahead. This is just some tools energy raters use. They take pictures. We all take, you know, and we definitely take pictures. There's a lot of required pictures that we need to take now for these certifications for HERS ratings. We have a good library of photos, but we can use those to communicate too. We can little tools where you can write on it, draw on it, type on it, and then send it to the builder, send it to the trade, and say this needs to be corrected. Just every little tiny seam adds up. So just missing little details along the way where all these things haven't been sealed, that all those linear feet eventually equal a big hole. So details to pay attention to. Framing anomalies. It looks like, I'm not totally certain. I can't recall at the moment what this photo.
The studs overshoot the top plate.
What's that saying one more time?
The studs overshoot the top plate.
Oh yeah. So you really don't have something. Yes, thank you. Sealing the top of those stud bays, and so air can move right up through them. Go to the next slide. I think that one's even. Oh, yeah. Where you that? Thank you. Now I can see. Where you got 2x6 kind of plumbing wall, you know, with 2x4 top plates, and therefore this 2 inches of, you know, open space. Basically, once that gets drywalled in, you're just going to have these air gaps of air just channeling up through every stud bay in that wall. Go ahead. And then, yeah, again, just importance of sealing the lid and making sure that, you know, you see the bottom right there, the sill sealer they're using, and the other one, they're using some kind of spray foam, but looks like it could be super thin. You want it probably at least the thickness of a finger, so that just the undulations of the drywall or the wood, that when you lay it in there, there's enough foam to, you know, actually make a continuous gasket. Go ahead. This is just the pictures of different Mitch there on the bottom, putting in some of the seal sealer. Got to really educate your drywallers though, if they're going to push drywall up underneath against it, they got to lift it up and not just rip that blue stuff off. And some people who don't know better, go in and rip it off before they install the drywall and just destroy all that work. Go ahead. And then important around the boot itself, as the boot comes into the plane of the room, be it a wall, floor, ceiling, they really need to seal that perimeter of the boot coming into the wall. And because once they put the final finish register or grill on, you won't see it, but you won't have noticed all this leakage that's going to happen. Go ahead. Penetrations. There's just numerous penetrations in most homes, and all the details around sealing those holes, be they electrical outlets, ICATs, insulation, contact, airtight caps for lights that are going to go in your ceiling, or going with an LED with a different profile, that doesn't is less of a penetration, or fans that, there's gasketing options, there's foam options, there's integrated options that can help seal those leaks of penetrations you have to have in your construction. The envelope itself, we have had Aero, correct me if I'm wrong, Aero Seal, for duct sealing, where that technology uses liquid that's put on in a pressurized or pressurized duct system, and the liquid finds all the leaks and kind of seeps into the leaks and then starts to harden and seal up those ducts. Well, they basically took that system to the next level, and the aero barrier, which you see all the spray guns, they're spraying that into the air, and it's finding all the leaks in the house and sealing up the house in the same way. That can be expensive, but you do, I mean, in certain places I've seen AeroSeal, certain parts of the country, AeroSeal for ducts is pretty standard. It's pretty much being done in almost every house, and then obviously it's supply and demand that brings down the cost. Aero barrier is a newer technology, but we're seeing it more and more. Go ahead. Timeline. The key is communication, and your rater hopefully can be part of that communication system to help your trades understand how they interact with each other. When's everyone doing their thing? When are all these air sealing specifically measures happening, and who's doing them and when? Just having the rater involved from the beginning before bids go out will help you all be on the same page, and reconstruction meetings and stuff, just expectations are clear up front. This is just and also, rater scheduled to, if they're going to do tested ductwork pre-drywall, that phone call needs to happen so they're there on time, and then just making sure that communication is good between the super and the rater for all the work they have to do. Go ahead. Got a couple more slides. I'm going to try to go fast. Just so you know, there's 2 tracks for HVAC quality installation for Energy Star for single family and new homes. There's 2 tracks. One is hiring the rater to do additional testing and verification, and the other for new homes is hiring a HQuido's credentialed HVAC contractor. We found out yesterday that option may be going away. That was something I had heard hinted at in a webinar about Energy Star about a year or 2 ago, that they'll likely be sunsetting HQuido's. I'm talking now about at the beginning of 2026. Go ahead, next slide. For multifamily, pretty similar. You can hire a rater to do it for you, or a credentialed functional testing agent, but they're going to be minimizing that option at the same time with multifamily. And Scott, you want to hit these next 2 slides and we're done?
Yeah, just real quick. As you can imagine, there's more money being put into these programs with the incentives. So that's going to come with more oversight. That means the EPA and the DOE, who own these programs, they have government oversight internally. So that's going to be increased a little bit. We're going to have increased scrutiny as an HCO, RESNET is, and we're having to ramp up our quality assurance program, as we oversee the provider network and the raters and individuals. Next slide. This is kind of just the last thing to remind you, maybe the last pitch, to work with an energy rater. They're doing a lot of things for you besides delivering the piece of paper at the end that shows you're compliant. There is one question, if you want to skip to the last slide, Mitch, that I'm going to ask you to address if you can. And that was for the financing, the loan programs that you mentioned with HUD. The question was, do those require any of the federal programs? Like, do you have to have Energy Star or Zero Energy Ready to qualify for those loan programs?
Yes, for the HUD loan programs, as I mentioned, it's a 2-parter. You have to do the Energy Star portfolio manager and score well enough on that SETI. And then the second part is that you have to certify the building to a green energy program. These days, most are choosing Energy Star multifamily, but you could also choose NGBS, LEED, and a couple other options. If that answers the question.
Yep. Thanks, Mitch. Nancy, I didn't notice if there was any other ones, but we are probably at the top of our hour. We thank everybody for attending.